Support for Swan Song is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you. I played a few turn-based strategy games over the month of February. I'd been looking forward to Fire Emblem Engage for quite a bit, so I dumped about 20 hours into that this month. I've also returned to regularly playing Super Robot Taisen W before going to bed a couple times a week, and I've been having a great time playing with that series' unique mechanics again. But what I wasn't expecting was that the turn-based strategy game that would hit the most would be this episode's game, Langrisser Millennium WS The Last Century, developed by Masaya, published by Bandai, and released on March 9th, 2000. The Langrisser series mainly consists of turn-based strategy RPG games, most of which never saw an international release at the time. You may know the original Langrisser from its North American release on the Genesis under the localized name Warsong. Most games in the Langrisser series are primarily defined by these two aspects. First is the commander system, which allows you to take out multiple units tied to that troop by taking out the commander unit. The second is that the character designs of this series were handled by the famous illustrator Urushihara Satoshi, perhaps most well known for his attention to detail in nude illustrations of female characters in adult-oriented works. If you love 90s anime style, Langrisser's character designs have got you covered. The development team behind the Langrisser games would leave NCS in 1996 to form another studio called CareerSoft. Despite their departure, CareerSoft would remain involved in the development of the Langrisser series until 1998's Langrisser 5: The End of Legend for Saturn and PlayStation. As the name implies, this game served as a conclusion to the storyline of the mainline Langrisser series to that point. Despite that, NCS still wanted Langrisser to carry on, so they created a spin-off series with the release of 1999's Langrisser Millennium for the Dreamcast. This game was instead developed by Santa Entertainment, a studio set up by ex-Koei staff. Character designs were no longer to be done by Urushihara Satoshi, instead now to be handled by manga artist Kai Shaku and illustrator Keitu Shokai. Ultimately, this game wouldn't be a turn-based strategy game at all, but rather a real-time strategy game modeled after the 1996 Sega Saturn game Dragon Force. That experiment didn't pay off, as the deviation from the core Langrisser formula was not what fans wanted, and it became somewhat of a black sheep in the series. A year later, in 2000, Langrisser Millennium WS would come along on the WonderSwan, back to the classic turn-based strategy formula, and modeling its core systems on Der Langrisser for the Super Famicom. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to save the series. The WonderSwan game would be the last game released in the Langrisser series until 2015 with the release of Langrisser Reincarnation Tensei for the Nintendo 3DS. Langrisser Millennium WS The Last Century is a prequel to Langrisser Millennium, taking place 100 years prior to the Dreamcast game, but I'll be perfectly honest and say that I don't know enough about Langrisser lore to tie both of the games together. The opening of the game talks about an organization known as the Federation, which sent out a secret squad to search the world for ultimate weapons and the remains of a super civilization named Suluktan, destroyed hundreds of years ago in a war. The secret squad would discover these weapons rather quickly. As the ship with the weapons was out to sea, it was hit by lightning and became stranded. The leader of the secret squad ordered a group of bandits to steal animals from the nearby village people so they could carry the weapons by land instead. The bandits would attack the home of a young boy training as a swordsman, and the protagonist of this game, Zion. He drives them off, but quickly discovers that there's much more than it seems, and well, he gets dragged into the rest of the game. As a whole, Langrisser Millennium WS has 28 missions across 2 branches following the 8th mission, for a total of 18 missions per playthrough. I'm shocked that Langrisser Millennium WS isn't on more recommended WonderSwan game lists, because this game both plays great and looks great. Langrisser Millennium WS is definitely one of the games that makes the most masterful use of the WonderSwan's limited grayscale palette in my eyes. I have a few graphical and interface nitpicks, but as a whole, it's hard to think of how the artist could have made this game look any better than it already does. Story sequences look great thanks to beautiful illustrations and character portraits, some of which even eclipse their mainline Langrisser counterparts. A lot of attention went into making battle maps extremely readable and facilitating the identification of various terrain types on the map. Each terrain tile also needs to support dark and bright pulsating variants on the map, which means they had to restrict themselves to even fewer shades of gray to play with when designing these tiles. Battle animations play out on unique backgrounds for each terrain tile type and feature character and unit portraits in the bottom left and bottom right corners of the screen. This really serves as a graphical showcase for the WonderSwan in its grayscale years, and luckily for us, it's more than just a visual treat. One of the things I like the most about Langrisser Millennium WS is how quickly it felt like I was playing the quote, real game. Oftentimes when you're playing a turn-based strategy RPG, it feels like there's a certain onboarding period at the start of the game, regardless of whether there's a formal tutorial or not, when the game doesn't fully trust the player to make full use of its systems. In-game verbs are gated away from the player until they've proved to the game that they fully understand the few verbs they already have access to. While this can be a good thing for new players to the genre, going through this kind of thing every single time can be irritating to genre veterans who want to skip to the good part. Langrisser Millennium WS immediately felt refreshing when I realized I had full access to all my units' verbs from the very first mission of the game, and the game trusted me to experiment with these options to clear the map before me. By the end of the second mission, the game informed me that one of my units was ready for a class change, and I was immediately prompted to make a choice as to that character's future role in my party. Now, to be clear, I've never seen a game with a character class change happening within 30 minutes of starting the game. That's crazy. This is the most 0 to 60 I've ever seen a turn-based strategy game when it comes to making the player engage with its systems, and I absolutely love that about it. Don't get me wrong, there's still going to be new classes to play with as units join the party and spells to discover as your units level up, but it feels natural because it's baked into the core progression systems of the game instead of feeling artificially restricted just simply because it's the first few chapters of the game. Langrisser Millennium WS actually feels like a good game that was deemed guilty by association to Langrisser Millennium, and that's a damn shame. Ever since messing around with Langrisser 2 in a Mega Drive emulator a few years ago, I've been wanting to get more into Langrisser, and Langrisser Millennium WS was good enough to make me bump it up a few spots on my priority list of games to check out in the future. If you can read Japanese, the story has much less of a barrier of entry than a lot of the other mecha-related strategy RPGs on the system, as those often have prerequisite knowledge in order to make any sense at all. And if you can't read Japanese, but can at least figure out the basic menu commands, this is one of the few games I've not wanted to put down after finishing a footage capture session due to how good its presentation is and how engaging it is from the very start.